Hello and welcome to the 4th review of Requests Month 2016. This is Aliens Colonial Marines for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. What you're seeing here is of course the PC version, and it was sent to me by TylerBoy565. Thank you, it is greatly appreciated. This is a rather infamous first-person shooter developed by Gearbox Software, Timegate Studios, Demiurge Studios, and Nerve Software, and published by Sega in February of 2013, although it was originally announced really in 2006, although they finally unveiled the title in 2008. So in case you can't tell, this thing was in development hell for a while, and it really shows. And it also draws a lot of comparisons to another title that Gearbox ended up finishing up, which was Duke Nukem Forever, and it was also in development hell for way too long and ended up suffering horribly for it. But when this thing came out, there was a huge uproar around it, both because of the fact that on PC in particular, it was barely playable, and on top of that, it's become one of the most commonly cited examples of a game where they show off these ridiculously good graphics at E3 and their various trailers, and then when the actual game hits store shelves, you find out that it actually looks nothing like that. But here we are 3 years later. What's this game like now? Did they ever fix any of the problems that it had? And more importantly, is it the mind-bending atrocity that people make it out to be? Let's find out. Well, in terms of presentation, it is extremely lacking. As I mentioned before, this was released in 2013. It feels like a game from about 2006 or 2007. Most things are various shades of gray, although they do throw in a few colors here and there, so it's not quite as terrible as most modern military shooters. And it doesn't really have much in the way of good texture quality. In fact, the textures are generally pretty terrible in this game, from the horrible screens that you'll run into. I mean, just look at this. These screens are terrible. They don't even obviously display text. It's just lines. And then there's the horrible textures that you'll see in various locations throughout the maps, where the textures just are clipping through things, or they're just not applied correctly. For example, this blood spatter on a device here. It not only lacks visual fidelity, but it lacks polish. This thing looks like it was slapped together at the 11th hour in a lot of spots. Characters are extremely plastic looking, the lip syncing is terrible, the cutscenes are all done in compressed pre-rendered video, and thus they end up looking absolutely horrible. Animations are only really decent in first person, although the pistol reloading animation is one of the worst I have ever seen. Why on earth would you pinch the slide release? You just hit it with your thumb, with your shooting hand. Ugh. More importantly, why are the guns so gigantic on the screen? They take up a good maybe fourth of the screen, and it just gets in your way. I mean, at least the first-person weapon modeling is generally okay, but that's really one of the very few things that this game actually has going for it in the visual department. The vast majority of it looks like a game that was released about 10 years ago instead of only 3 years ago. And the problems don't end there. This thing is absolutely plagued by graphics glitches. They're everywhere, from clipping errors to enemies getting stuck on the environment and just spazzing out from the physics engine, to these really weird lighting glitches I ran into where the screen would actually flicker numerous times before it stabilized and the lighting was just completely different from how it was just a moment ago for no discernible reason. Frankly, they should be ashamed for releasing it in such a state. I mean, this is after patches. Imagine how horrible it was on release. I mean, there was apparently some glitch where certain enemies would just start dancing, basically. Now that seems to have been fixed, but there's still a huge amount of glitches, and they are often very distracting. It's also really distracting when you have really weird visual touches, like when a character does its rubber banding, where your NPC allies might get too far behind you and they'll pop up right next to you so that you can continue as normal, like in pretty much every other current FPS. They actually appear with a bright flash of light, and there's just this weird haze that appears around them, like they actually used a teleporting device. It's really weird and distracting, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out why they thought it was a good idea. But the issues don't even really stop there. One of the most glaring visual issues is the way that the aliens move. Sometimes it kind of resembles what they did in the actual movies, but most of the time they actually just kind of run around on their two legs instead of actually crawling around on the walls, being that really weird snake-like reptilian menace that they are in the actual movies, and having that just unsettling way they move. They don't really do that in this, and it really does detract from the atmosphere overall. In fact, this game is absolutely terrible at generating atmosphere. They seem to think that dark spaces equals creepy, and that's not really true. The Alien series always built up a lot of tension, not just from being dark, but also from the fact that the aliens could come at you from any direction at any time, and you would never know it until it was too late. And then you get to this, and it's incredibly predictable. So the visuals really end up leaving a lot to be desired. But what about the sound design? Well, it's not very good. You have voice acting that should be really great. You have Lance Henriksen reprising his role as Bishop. You have Michael Biehn reprising his role as Hicks, although he really just phones in the voice acting for this one. It's like he doesn't want to be there, and it really does show when in the opening cutscene he's trying to give a distress signal, but he just sounds incredibly bored more than anything else. But when it comes to the rest of the characters you'll run into, their voice acting is at best competent. You never really get the impression that the actors were really into what they were doing here. They obviously didn't really care too much about the source material, and they clearly did not also care about the script that they were going with, and that really does hurt it in a lot of ways. Characters sound bored when they're not supposed to. The acting can be described as hammy in a lot of places. It just doesn't do a lot to help the game out. Likewise for the music, which is pretty much what you would expect from the Alien series, but it just lacks weight in general. And then there's the sound effects, where they did try to rip some of the sounds from the movie and try to recreate those, but unfortunately they didn't necessarily polish things up. So you have things like the pulse rifle being in full auto but sounding like it's firing in bursts.
Heads up! They're rushing up!
So you just end up with a lot of weird sound glitches like that, and other weird sound glitches as well here and there, that just really detract from the experience, and you don't really have a lot of really great ambient sounds as well. It doesn't do a good job of creating a strong atmosphere, and ends up instead just coming across as something they slapped together with the resources they had and just went good enough when it clearly was not. But as pathetic as the presentation is, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and I hate to break it to you guys, but this game is actually considered canon for the Alien franchise. It takes place about 17 weeks after the events of Alien 3, and you are part of a Colonial Marine detachment, which is sent to investigate the Sulaco, a ship that, if you have seen Alien 3, you would know was the ship that Ripley and company managed to escape on from LV-426, except that the Sulaco is now somehow in the vicinity of LV-426 again. Because reasons. Blatant stupidity aside, you do eventually find out that the Sulaco is infested with aliens, and there's Weyland-Yutani PMCs that are there and doing strange experiments and such. And so you basically have to fight your way out through the Xenomorphs and the Weyland-Yutani PMCs, and in the process your ship gets blasted to bits and you end up crashing on LV-426, which is very convenient because then the developers can shove as much "hey, isn't this nostalgic" crap in your face. You do of course end up going to Hadley's Hope, the colony that was completely infested by xenomorphs. You find all kinds of references back to the movie Aliens all over the place. You find things like Hudson's pulse rifle. You find Hicks' shotgun. All sorts of things like that, because isn't that what we really want from Aliens? Lots of nostalgia, not the feeling of being a badass space marine going on a bug hunt. You see, that's the real problem here. In their crusade for just triggering nostalgic episodes, they managed to neglect some very important things. Important thing number one, the plot in this game is downright horrible. once you get past the very basic premise of Weyland-Yutani is doing the same exact thing they always do, which is experiment on the xenomorphs because corporate science-y reasons, the plot just becomes a completely jumbled, incoherent mess that doesn't really give a crap about continuity between Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3, and even Alien Resurrection, oddly enough, and instead just throws in whatever nostalgic crap they can find in order to effectively turn this into a really, really bad fan fiction. I mean, to give you an idea, there's a character who shows up in this game and is supposed to be very, very dead. And in fact, when said character shows up, everybody's just like, wait, how the hell did you live through all of this stuff? How are you standing here in front of us? And the response is basically, meh. The writers never really explain any of their decisions for baffling stupidity, and more importantly, the rest of the game just feels like it was slapped together just to have a cookie-cutter storyline. Only instead of using a cookie cutter, what they basically used was a rusty piece of wire that broke off halfway through them carving the cookie. And thus you end up with a bunch of characters who are all cardboard cutouts, extremely predictable, in an environment where pretty much everything is telegraphed from a mile away, and not only that, but it never makes any sense at all. Which of course leads us to the gameplay. It's a fairly standard, modern, console-style shooter in which you have 2 weapon slots and a sidearm slot, so you can end up using 2 primary weapons and then a pistol which has infinite ammo, in order to completely eviscerate your foes. Luckily, they introduce a radial menu in this, so instead of just having those 2 weapon slots and having to constantly switch back and forth between weapons that you find on the ground, you actually carry all of the weapons that you find around, and you can swap them out in these 2 slots. In fact, you can also swap out the sidearm slot as well, and you'll be able to customize your loadout. You can also customize the weapons themselves by giving them different paint jobs if you unlock them via challenges or ranking, and you can also give attachments to these various weapons to change how they perform. For example, one of the earliest ones you'll find is an extended magazine attachment for the pulse rifle, bringing it from 40 rounds up to 60 rounds, which is pretty handy. Of course, it does that at the cost of reload speed, but who cares? 60 rounds instead of 40. But even though these do slightly change how the weapons behave, I have to ask, what was the point of having weapon customization like this in the first place? I mean, you rank up, you get a point that you can use to buy a specific attachment for any particular weapon, well, as long as you've reached the appropriate rank to unlock the ability to purchase said attachment, but it's just injecting a rank system into a game where it doesn't really need to be. I never really understood the necessity for every modern FPS to have some sort of XP system where you have levels and these levels have some effect on the game. Luckily, you don't really need to worry too much about the attachments, they just make your life a bit easier in some respects. For example, there's a scope you can put on the battle rifle that will actually highlight where enemies are, except I noticed something pretty problematic with it, and this actually extends to all of the sights. The sights do not necessarily shoot exactly where you're aiming. On the battle rifle scope, it does, but you'll notice when I show you this clip here that the highlighting actually is not on the actual characters themselves. It's off by several pixels, and in fact, this is something that you will notice with pretty much any of the sights and the weapon handling in this game in general. The only real difference I found between aiming down the sights and actually just firing from the hip is that aiming down the sights only really helped me on the weapons that are actually somewhat accurate, like the battle rifle or the assault rifle, which is a 3-round burst rifle. If you're just using the pulse rifle or any of the other fully automatic weapons, you're better served just spraying from the hip because you're actually going to be more accurate that way. You may be wondering why. Well, look at this. This is me using a red dot sight on the pulse rifle. Notice that the shots are not actually hitting where the dot is pointed. Yes, that is right. The sights are not representative of where your shots are actually going to go. Unless, of course, you're using something like the battle rifle, which is a semi-automatic marksman rifle, and of course they're going to have it to where your shots are going to go where the reticle's pointed. The thing is, the animations continue to wave around quite a bit while you're just moving around, while you're shooting at things, or while you're just even sitting still, and so they're never going to be truly representative of where your bullets are going to go when you aim down your sights. It's very, very annoying. Luckily, the vast majority of your weapons don't really need much precision. I mean, you can just kind of spray and pray with the pulse rifle, the SMG, and all that, just because you have a lot of rounds to throw at things, and ammunition is very plentiful for those. You've got a shotgun that, of course, does ridiculous amounts of damage. In fact, you've got 3 different shotguns you can get in this thing, as far as I'm aware. I didn't get all of the legendary weapons in this, but you get Hicks shotgun, you get a pump action, and you get a tactical shotgun. So if you really like just spraying buckshot everywhere, well, guess what? You can do that. In fact, at one point, I didn't know that you could actually swap out weapons in your slots because the game hadn't told me. And so I was running around with Hicks shotgun and the pump action shotgun at the same time. And I would just swap the shotguns back and forth, and it was just as effective as anything else. The combat in this is actually ridiculously easy for the most part. There are a few enemies here and there that might give you a bit of trouble, but it's mostly because they actually have guns. You see, fighting the aliens in this is stupidly easy. They're extremely dumb, they basically just charge you, very easy to hit, they don't take a whole lot to go down. Their only real danger is when they get in melee with you, they kind of stun lock you. It's not quite a stun lock, but it does seize up your movements and your aiming, so you're not exactly capable of doing what you were doing before, and it just gets really irritating. So you have to hit the melee button to just knock them aside, so you can go back to just doing your own thing. But until you get introduced to the spitters, which are just aliens that spit acid, you're never going to really worry too much about them except when you get swarmed. What you're going to worry more about are the human enemies who have ridiculously high accuracy. I mean, they're still incredibly stupid, but they're just really good shots. So you tend to prioritize the human targets and then go on to the xenomorph targets after that. But here's the thing, when you think of Colonial Marines and you think of aliens, you do not think of fighting the Weyland-Yutani Corporation's PMC. You think of fighting aliens, you think of going on a bug hunt, and a lot of this game is spent fighting the Weyland-Yutani PMCs. It basically turns into a really crappy ripoff of Call of Duty at that point, and it just leaves you scratching your head wondering what the hell they were thinking. And that feeling crops up a lot throughout the course of this game. I mean, for example, you only get to use the smart gun once in the campaign. And it's actually fairly early on into the campaign, so you don't really get to savor how badass it feels to get that smart gun and just lay waste to entire hordes of aliens like you could in the older AVP games. Instead, it feels like they went, oh, well, it's an aliens game, we have to include a smart gun, so let's just tick off a box and make them only have it in this specific section pretty early on in the game. And that feeling of ticking off boxes extends to things like the sewer level. Yes, there's a sewer level in this. Even worse, it's a mandatory stealth segment, where you have to creep along through the sewer and worry about these aliens, which only locate via sound. And instead of getting the desired effect, which is this kind of creepy tension, it really just ends up being more annoying than anything else because it's just so easy to get past these particular aliens. It's a bit moot as well because those aliens don't show up in any other portion of the game. And the further you get in, the more samey everything feels. In fact, a lot of the environments are straight up recycled. You go back through the same places sometimes 3 times, and it just comes across as ridiculously lazy. But the absolute pinnacle of laziness is the final boss fight. You're going up against the Alien Queen, because of course you are. They have to throw in that final tick box, right? And how do you defeat the Alien Queen? Do you be a badass like Ellen Ripley and get into the loader and do the whole "get away from her, you bitch" thing? Do you get the big-ass gun of doom? Do you get into a tank? Do you get into anything like that? No. Instead, you flip 3 switches and then you press a button. And then it triggers the ending cutscene. What a pathetic, underwhelming conclusion to a pathetic, beyond underwhelming campaign. There is absolutely nothing this game does well. It's absolutely plagued by bugs. It has a completely unnecessary level up system. The weapon handling is garbage. The enemy variety is rather minimal. The introduction of human enemies was completely unnecessary and kind of goes at odds with what we want from an Aliens game. The story is absolutely atrocious. The characters are bland, uninteresting cardboard cutouts. The graphics are terrible. The sound design is pathetic for the most part. And every single time you come across a moment that should be awesome, like a loader machine fight against a really powerful alien, that should be frickin' awesome. Instead, it's boring as hell, and that's when it does work. Most of the time, it barely functions. The camera spazzes all over the place when you're doing things, and you end up dying for no discernible reason. This game is just a complete disaster. I've been told the multiplayer's good, but it's completely dead at this point. You have to actually go find people in order to organize a multiplayer session of any of the game modes in this. And even then, you're dealing with the core mechanics of Aliens Colonial Marines, which are just trash to begin with. It's actually legitimately surprising just how crap this game is, considering if you look at it on paper, it's basically just a generic modern military shooter with the Aliens name slapped on it. But then you play it, and you realize that all of that stuff you thought was hyperbole, about people saying, oh, this game is terrible, isn't really all that hyperbolic. This game really is quite terrible. And the further you get into it, the worse it gets. But hey, at least it's a relatively short game, and the only times you're going to die are due to just BS, like things exploding on invisible walls, or acid from the aliens just killing you even though you had no idea how much health you had, because the game is terrible at telling you how much health you have unless you have your heads-up display on, which is not available in the highest difficulty mode, which is what I played this on. Not that that really matters. I mean, the game is a complete pushover on any of the other difficulties as well, so whatever. That's really beside the point. The real point of this is, there is absolutely no reason for you to play Aliens Colonial Marines. It's a downright terrible game. Avoid it like the plague. I give it a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching.